Welcome to the Bookers Alliance podcast, where we hold the pencil and the pencil is power. Coming at you right now is your host, Marky Mark, along with the man, the myth, the legend, Frank Donaldson. Join us as we discuss the ever-changing landscape of professional wrestling. So hang on tight, you jabronis, and enjoy the ride. Hey, welcome in, everybody. Thank you for joining the Bookers Alliance podcast today. Come on in the house, pull yourself up a ringside seat, and let's talk about what we're going to do today. How you doing today, Frank?
Oh, I'm good. I'm ready to do some fantasy booking here, ready to make some storylines turn into reality and let everybody's imagination run wild today.
Ooh, what you gonna do?
All right.
All right, so today's topic, we're going to title this one, The Tribal Screw Job.
All right, there we go.
So this is in the same vein of the a la Montreal Screw Job. And we're going to just kind of put this out here and see where we can fantasy book this idea that we kind of came up with. And so, you know, if any of you Marvel fans out there have watched any of the What If series, this is kind of what it would be like. So we're titling this The Tribal Screw Job. And let's run the scenario down, Frank. Let's run it down for him.
All right. Well, we're a little over 25 years removed from the original Screw Job, so I figured it was time to freshen it up a little bit. Maybe we take some of the current stars of today and put them in the same type of scenario. And then, you know, we've got a rival company again like we had 25 years ago. So we've got that second player that we need to kind of paint the picture with. So let's freshen it up. Let's use some of today's action stars, some of today's activity, all that we got going on here, and let's make it current. Let's see how we can write it out and see what it would look like if Roman Reigns was to be screwed by the WWE and flee to AEW.
All right, so let's remind everybody, just in case we got some new wrestling fans out there, let's remind everybody what the actual Montreal Screw Job was.
The youngins, the youngins that are out there listening.
And before we do, let's crack.
I got to raise one up here.
Let's crack one open here.
All right.
Toast to you, sir. Cheers. All right, so
that'll get our creative juices flowing.
So Montreal Screw Job was three integral players. You had Vince McMahon, you had Shawn Michaels, and you had Bret Hart.
Yep.
All with huge, massive egos.
Definitely. That might actually be an understatement. For the three that we had involved, that might actually be an understatement.
So as our residential historian, sir, do you want to kind of summarize what the actual Montreal Screw Job was?
Sure. So Survivor Series 1997, Bret the Hitman Hart was defending his title against Shawn Heartbreak Kid Michaels. Shawn had been slated to go over on Bret. Bret really didn't want to do the job for Shawn Michaels due to the history they'd had since WrestleMania 12 the year prior. Just the altercations, the interactions that they had. Bret didn't really want to do the job for him in his hometown of Canada because Bret felt like he was the Canadian hero. He was the stand-up guy for Canada. And he didn't want to do the job for a degenerate, as he called him, like Shawn Michaels. So apparently Shawn and Triple H and Vince McMahon concocted a little plan in the back to screw Bret Hart out of that title and get Shawn Michaels out of there with the belt.
So let's also put in here when you said they were going to screw Bret Hart, you know, to quote the infamous line from Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
Yeah.
Bret screwed.
Well, Bret did screw Bret. I mean, so, for those longtime wrestling fans out there, you got to do business on the way out. You know, if you're going to go to a different company, you got to do business on the way out.
You can't walk out as the champ.
No, there's just no way. And I mean, a little bit more history. So again, for the young listeners that may not remember, Alundra Blaze was a WWE Women's Champion about 2 years before this, and she defected and went over to WCW. She was fired while she was champion, and she, her feelings were hurt. She was upset about the whole thing. So she brought the belt right to TV per Eric Bischoff's instructions. and threw it in the trash right on WCW TV and said that's what she thinks of the WWE and their women's title. So you got to look at it from Vince McMahon's perspective and say, that was a dagger
Absolutely.
to his business's heart to let that happen. Now, granted, it was the women's champion. It didn't like it was, their top guy or their best performer. But now we're dealing with Bret Hart, who at the time was their top guy, who was their best performer.
Right.
You don't want him to pop up with the Winged Eagle belt on WCW. You don't want that belt anywhere near WCW television. And you definitely don't want it disrespected on WCW television. And fact of the matter is, once Bret gets out of the building with that title, you don't know what's going to happen to it. If anybody who's been watching that Most Wanted Treasures show that they're doing on A&E from WWE, you see a lot of old wrestlers whip out belts that they just never gave up after they lost. They're like, hey, I got this belt here from 1983, and here it still sits. So, if they're not returning the belts on the way out the door, whatever they do with them is kind of up to them. Now, yeah, Vince and WWE would have sued the pants off of WCW. They would have, but the fans that are watching don't know anything about lawsuits and all that. All they know is what they saw on their TV for those 15 minutes. And Vince just couldn't let that title end up in the wrong hands, as they say. It was almost like an infinity stone. To go back to your analogy from earlier, you got to protect that last infinity stone. Right. You can't let Thanos take it over to WCW and then erase the whole WWE, which would have been half of the wrestling population.
Not to mention what it would have done to the lineage of that belt.
Just everything. I mean, when your main title's in the trash, you're trash.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
This wasn't uncommon. I mean, Ric Flair bought the big gold over to WWE 6 years prior to this, so this wasn't enough, 5 years prior to this. So it wasn't uncommon, but it didn't help WCW at all. I mean, WCW knew it was a problem. They got into litigation and they found a way to get their belt back, but the damage was done already. I mean, you got their former top guy sporting their top belt, and over in WCW land, you ain't got no belt and you ain't got no top guy. You can't let that happen if you're a promoter. I mean,
perception is key.
Yeah, and that's a death knell there.
Right.
If you're champion, not your women's champion who, was a third tier performer, your main guy is gone and your main title is gone. If it goes in the trash, your business just went right in there with it. So.
Right. And we're not knocking the women's championship or anything like that, but just understand back in that time, the women's wrestling movement had not happened.
No.
They weren't considered in regard to any of what the in-ring work the men were doing. They weren't regarded in that way.
I mean, let's call a spade a spade. They were the tier 3. I mean,
they were.
You had that heavyweight division, you had the IC tag division, they were kind of equals. And then the women were kind of, they were just that filler, card filler. I mean, it's unfortunate, but again, this was the 90s. I mean,
right.
WNBA wasn't even a thing in the 90s when this was happening. So, I mean, women's sports have come a long way since then, which is a good thing. But the fact of the matter is, at this point in time, when it happened, it was, it hurt. It wasn't a death knell. But had it been Bret Hart as the champion, that's a death knell. That's the end. There ain't no coming back from that. So.
No. But, that kind of took place. And the only time that has ever been teased in WWE or referenced again was between John Cena and CM Punk.
Yeah.
CM Punk was threatening to kind of do the same thing, to leave the organization with the title. And, that they kind of played it up, but, none of that really came to fruition.
Had Tony Khan been older, maybe he would have just fled and they would have started AEW all those years back. Maybe that's what would have happened back in 2011. Maybe that's a fantasy book for another day.
Maybe.
Right? Somebody write, hey, woman in the back, write that down over there. Somebody scribble that down. Intern, write that down.
Write that down.
That's a good one.
So we're going to fantasy book this today of what would happen if Roman was kind of put in this same situation.
Yeah.
So would the situation be Roman is leaving the company for greener pastures, or does Roman just not like the program that he's in and doesn't want to drop the belt?
So what I think, especially lately, a lot of Seth Rollins, a lot of champions are talking about this whole reduced schedule that Roman's working and how, you had to create a completely new title because of it and blah, blah, blah. My thinking would be, Triple H and the company go to Roman and say, hey, you know what, Roman, we need you to work more dates now. We know we signed this contract with you, for XYZ amount of dates, but we're going to have to renegotiate that contract because this ain't working for me, brother.
And pull a Hogan on them.
Yeah. And if, and if Triple H comes up to Roman and says, hey, we got to renegotiate this contract, I feel like Roman would say, I ain't renegotiating nothing. I signed, we signed, this is a legal binding document. There ain't no renegotiating happened. Well, this is exactly what happened in the Bret Hart situation. They signed Bret to the longest, most extensive contract they had ever signed. 2-3 months later, they're like, oh my God, we've sunk ourselves. We're in trouble. We can't afford it. We got to do something. And so, hey, if we're going to keep running neck and neck, maybe that's the scenario. Maybe they put the pressure on Roman to actually come to work a little bit more and sign up for a few more, maybe quote unquote free dates that he hadn't necessarily anticipated. And, maybe he's like, AEW's nipping out our heels and that. And Roman's like, hey, it's your problem. I got a contract. We're going to stick to this contract. And if that would have happened, Triple H was intricate in the first time it happened. So I don't see him shying away from saying, well, looks like we're going to have to take business into our own hands here.
So Shawn was the foil to Bret in this situation.
Yep.
Persuaded by Vince.
Yep.
And the beef was between Vince and Bret.
Yep.
That's really not the beef, though, between Bret and Shawn.
No,
I think it was.
They had their own.
They had their own beef on the side.
Shawn just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And because so the whole contract thing was kind of a Bret and Vince thing, because Vince was saying, hey, we can't afford you. You need to renegotiate, see if you can get a better deal at WCW, blah, blah, blah. But the Shawn and Bret thing was working completely opposite of that. They were having their own one-on-one beef that had nothing to do with the whole contract situation. Okay. It was, I think Vince kind of looked at it like, well, hey, if we have Shawn, we can afford to lose Bret because we can't afford to pay him. So, if something's got to give, they're like, hey, if we start pushing this guy, maybe we do let this guy go away. So, they all played into it. Okay. They all had their role to play.
So let's figure out who's going to be our third member in this play.
Yeah.
So we've got Roman playing the part of Bret. We've got Triple H playing the part of Vince.
Yeah.
Who's playing the part of Shawn? Who's going to be the foil?
I think our current world heavyweight champion, Seth Rollins, would be the perfect example for it. Because, he's already doing. He just did an interview last week with, who was it, Ariel Helwani or somebody like that. And he flat out said, he's repeatedly said, he's like, hey, the reason we had to come up with this world title is because Roman's working this reduced schedule and, he's doing business for himself. And he's like, hey, that it is what it is. But Seth continuously said, he loves wrestling, so he wants to be there for the people. Now, my thinking is, and Roman said it not too long ago on a SmackDown, he's got 5 kids at home and a wife at home. Mm-hmm. Seth's family is right there with him. They're,
traveling up and down the road.
Yeah,
with
Seth's
him.
Wife and his child are in the bus with him every day. They're on the road with him every day. He ain't leaving nobody he's leaving his home, but he's not leaving anybody behind to go pursue his dreams. Roman's at a point where he's got to leave his whole family behind and go pursue his dream. Well, he's the top guy now. You're not going to be the top guy and not flex a little bit of muscle. They're really in the benefit of being the top guy. So I don't fault either guy for what they're saying. Roman did the right thing. He got a damn good contract and he's using it the way it's supposed to be used. Kudos to him. But as a fan, you're like, and we talked about this before, previous podcasts, in one-on-ones, you want to see that title on TV.
Right.
So I think Seth would be the perfect guy to say, hey, you know what? I'm not feeling this. If you want to go off and be at home, just go off and be at home. Get out of here. We can handle this without you. And that sets up automatic beef between the guys, which, much like Bret and Shawn, they've already got history. It's not like they would be introducing some brand new feud to get, to get this kicked off. This already exists anyway. 2, they've got past history. They've got 10 years worth of past history with each other where you could just say, hey, they were friends for a while and then those competitive juices started flowing and, one guy wanted to be the best, one other guy wanted to be the best. And, when you got 2 alphas sitting at the top of a mountain, something's going to have to give. So, and WWE ain't going to give. So it's got to be one of the guys. So I feel like that scenario would lay out everything just right for this type of situation. Now, as a disclaimer, nobody take this and go tell WWE about this. Damn it, if this happens here, I'm cursing all of you.
Yeah.
We cannot let this happen.
No.
But it's awesome to talk about. Fun. Only for fun.
So, all right. So now we've got our players. We've got the scenario. We're going to book the match. SummerSlam again.
Hey, why not? SummerSlam's coming up. Let's just say it's SummerSlam.
All right. So we're going to book the match at SummerSlam. Here comes the match. The scenario unfolds. Hunter and Seth screws over Roman, and now the aftermath. Obviously, Roman's pissed. He's going to be, as they say, spewing piss and vinegar.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to be mad.
Yeah, he's going to spit on Vince right now, or he's going to spit on Triple H right in the big nose, right on the floor.
Yep.
And he's going to throw monitors, and the bloodlines are going to come out, and they're going to destroy the ring. And
then
Solo's going to spike Paul Heyman because he's going to swear it was Paul's fault.
Yep. And then all of a sudden, Roman stands in the middle of the ring and spells out the letters AEW.
My God. So let's just all sit back for a second and let that sink in. Could you imagine?
No,
if that
can't even fathom that.
So okay, and we're not gonna go over our normal PG rating, but we are gonna toe the line here. First thing that would happen is that Tony would cream his entire self, not just his entire self. Every bit of him he'd look like when. Remember when Neo came out of the goo in Matrix? And that would be Tony Khan the minute the A started and Roman was spilling. So that would be done. And then it would turn into a snow party, and then we know how that would go. But so that's a little fantasy outside booking. But,
oh, Lord.
But yeah, so after that happened, I mean, again, could you imagine the thought amongst that? Could you imagine the next night on Dynamite? Could you imagine the next night on Raw? I mean, what the hell?
Yeah.
That would be one of those. I mean, this would be, so Bret going to WCW was big, right? That was huge when it happened. But let's be honest, WCW fumbled that ball. When they got Bret over there, they didn't get him in a compelling story. They didn't really use him the right way. They didn't know what to do. And Vince McMahon had apparently told Bret Hart when he was originally negotiating with WCW, they would never know what to do with a guy like Bret Hart. Damned if he wasn't right. I mean, he Nostradamus himself right into that because he was exactly right. Bret got over there, instead of capitalizing on what had already happened with the screw job, they got over there and got funky with making him a referee and blah, blah, blah. Instead of putting him in a top storyline right away, they kind of saddled him with the NWO, gave him the United States belt. I mean, what the hell? Gift horse mouth. The Bret Hogan storyline already had history too. I mean, you go in there, you jump right into that, start printing money.
Yep.
WCW was starting to get into a shaky area around that time anyway. Had they handled that correctly, they could have pulled themselves out of whatever rut they were getting themselves into. And they may still exist to this day had they managed that one situation correctly, because, they could have pulled the nose up. They could have saved themselves, but I digress. If Roman did that, first of all, I mean, the internet would explode.
Oh, the whole wrestling community would explode.
Yeah, the IWC would explode.
Every fan that was watching at the time or in the arena, you would have truly had what the F did we just see?
I mean, there's no way that you would just, couldn't even sink in.
You couldn't explain it. Yeah.
No.
It would be like, okay, was this planned? Is this real? Is this storyline?
Exactly.
Like, what is this?
So Twitter would immediately die. Yeah. Threads would become the new thing. Twitter would implode. I mean, Twitter would literally explode. There's no way it could handle the volume.
Elon Musk would be like, okay, you met your limit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody's limit would be made in the first 5 minutes of that happening. So we can't express the magnitude of what that would be. So we're just gonna move past it.
Yeah.
We could linger into that forever, just thinking you fanboying like, what the hell. But let's be honest, this is, this type of storyline would teeter as, on being as big as Hogan in the NWO. So I think it would go that way. So, Roman does the AEW, Roman's gone. Let's say, let's try and keep in line with the story. So let's say Jimmy and Solo go with Roman, right? Because they're angry. They feel like, they're screwed. But let's say Jey Uso stays kind of like Owen Hart stayed. Mm-hmm. Now, WWE bungled that when they had Owen Hart there.
Right.
You had Owen, you had Shawn in the same company, somewhat willing to work together. Somehow or another, they didn't turn that into a main event storyline and run crazy with it for, up to WrestleMania. They could have carried that story to WrestleMania. Shawn and Hunter screwed Bret. Owen's still there fighting for his family's honor. My goodness. Again, I digress. So we don't need the fantasy book 25 years ago. We're trying to stay current. Same thing though with Jay. I mean, now if Jimmy, Solo, and Roman are gone, let's just say Paul stays with Jay, right? Even though they're having their own little beef right now, but just to stay in character,
right?
You program Jay with Seth.
I mean, absolutely.
You could carry that through the entire winter, through the Rumble, carry it all the way into WrestleMania.
Jay's MO is revenge.
Exactly. It's revenge. He's the only remaining member of the bloodline left, and he's going to stand up for the bloodline or he's going to die trying.
Yep.
This writes itself.
Take my money.
Exactly. This writes itself. I mean, at this point now, as great as the bloodline storyline is, that would turn into something completely different. It would create a new main eventer in Jey Uso. I mean, and again, it writes itself. Yeah. You've still got umpteen, Samoa Dynasty family members you could bring in to help Jay down the road. So it's not like that's all, over.
Right.
Jay doesn't go into WrestleMania and lose and then it's just over. I mean, win, lose, or draw, that storyline can continue for a long time.
And so on the other side of the fence, what if Roman's first program in AEW winds up being with John Moxley?
So I was going to mention something with that, but then I was going to ask, how much creative liberty do I have here? I mean,
the world is your oyster, sir.
So that being said, then what I would actually do, and this would rewind us back to that SummerSlam match, what I would actually do is have a hooded masked John Moxley come in and DDT Roman, which gave Seth the win, and then that masked character just wanders off back to the AEW. And then Roman does the whole AEW thing, blah, blah, blah. So now when Roman comes over to AEW and he comes out there to cut that badass promo, I'm here, I'm going to take over this business, I'm coming right after your world champion, blah, 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 blah. Halfway through it, you don't get that crazy, that cheery, jump up and joy baseball Cleveland Indians music. You just get, an ominous character coming down in the crowd.
Still with the hood.
Still with the hood, still with the mask. The exact same outfit he had on at SummerSlam.
Yes.
And then Roman catches him out of the corner of his eye, and Jimmy Solo, get that guy. That's the guy that screwed me. That's the guy that did all this. And they go up there to go get him, and hooded character just disappears. Well, later on in the night, you got the Samoans are still looking for Roman's still in his dressing room because he's still the same character, right?
Absolutely.
We don't need Roman to change a bit.
No, he ain't
Maybe he's only changing his name because they ain't carrying that over.
It might be Joseph Fatu.
Yeah, it could be whatever you want to call it. It could be Joseph Samoa, Granted, that bites off another character, but it'll work, right? But nonetheless, so Roman's back in the locker room and, Solo and Jimmy are out there looking for, well, then all of a sudden, the BCC just happens to pop up.
Beautiful.
And beats those guys down.
Yes.
And then you're like, well, why does the BCC care about these guys? They're brand new here. They haven't seen each other in 10 years since they weren't. Why would they beat them down? Blah, blah, blah. Well, now it's the end of the show. We've gone through our 2 hours. The end of the show, the BCC comes back out there. No Moxley, just the guys that you saw fighting in the back.
Yep.
And they come back out there and say, "You guys want to know why we were beating up those guys? Those outsiders or whatever you're gonna call them here. You want to know why? Well, you come out, old Roman Reigns. You come out here, and we'll tell you why." Old Roman Reigns saunters out there, he ain't doing his whole hold the belt. He ain't got none of that stuff no more. So he just saunters out there, and, all right, guys, you tell me what what brought all this? What was that? Well, now all of a sudden the masked character jumps over the barricade, slides in the ring, fast because this is John Moxley. He ain't gonna carry it slow. Right. He jumps in the ring, whips off the mask, whips off the sweatshirt. It says, "It was me, brother. It was always me.
Yep.
I screwed you. I cost you your title because you told everybody you were the best in our group.
Yes.
And I'm here to show you who was the best in our group." Roman's got this look of crazed, amazement / shock / anger on his face. and then the camera just kind of fades off with Moxley seething in the ring and Roman seething in the aisle at Moxley. I mean, my goodness.
Take my money. Just
Absolutely.
print money at that point.
Now, before we go any farther, I know you guys out there listening are like, well, they're just biting the whole storyline. But what we're doing, we're merging a lot of different storylines into one storyline because everybody in wrestling borrows. If you think you're going to watch something all wrestling that's completely original, you ain't seen it before, it ain't going to happen. Somebody's done it before, whether or not it was highlighted or whether or not it was a mainstream deal. It's happened before. The whole family, imploded, like the bloodline. It's happened before.
Absolutely.
It just may not have been to this level because these guys are great, great characters. But the fact of the matter is the story's there. So you take these stories, and we also know AEW and Tony Khan don't have any problem biting old storylines.
No.
But if they would bite it and execute it this way, this would propel them above where WWE's at right now. And that's... how people always say, what would it take for AEW to be? This is it.
This would be the needle mover.
This is it. Yeah, this is it. Now, there is nothing else that they'll be able to do in the current landscape of the business that's going to push them over WWE. That's not this scenario. But so we're at the end of the show. You got those two seething. You got Roman seething. Dean is the guy that screwed him over all along. Dean/John. Roman could even call him Dean. The very next show when he comes out there, Ambrose, I want you out here.
Yep.
And then the guys come out. Now at this point, Moxley can use his music and he can do his little, his what's that guy's name? Conor McGregor.
Conor
McGregor walk out there, spaghetti arms and all that. He can do all that and come out there and say, first of all, Ambrose is dead. I don't know who that guy is, but that guy's gone.
You're talking to John.
You're in Moxley's world right now here, and I'm John Moxley. I'm the best of any group that I've ever been in. And everybody looks like, whoa, Daniel Bryan and them are looking like, hey, wait a minute. They're kind of looking at Moxley like, hey, wait a minute. That was kind of a veiled shot there, but we don't address it. They just kind of give him that look and just like, I don't like that. I don't like that. He said nothing. John's still going. He's crazy. He's out there, so they blow it off. And he's telling Roman like, hey, you're in my world now. You're where the big boys play. Blah blah blah. All the stuff that WCW used to say just to kind of poke the bear of.
Right.
We're doing a WCW angle, but we're doing it so much better. So we'll stick it to you right here. And you've got gold right there. You can carry that into whatever event AEW calls their tit pole event.
Absolutely.
There's a lot you can fill in with that. There's a lot of different ways you could go. Kind of where I was going with the whole BCC, looking at where Moxley would say that. At some point in time, they may want to branch away from Moxley, so you kind of take all the outside forces out of it. Yeah. You just leave Roman and John.
And then John and Roman works, they wind up working, whether it be a 3-match program, 5-match program, 7-match
It could
program.
go a year.
Whatever it is, because there's so much history, storytelling, not to mention that, it always says that, different styles of wrestling make for the best matches. Yeah. John is he's
the brawler.
He's the brawler.
He's a wild brawler.
But you have Roman, who is the thinker. He is.
He's more of a so he's still a brawler too.
He's still a brawler,
but he's a controlled brawler,
right? And he's got the submissions in his bag.
Exactly. He can pull out the wrestling when it's needed.
Yeah.
Or he could just beat you down because he's just a big strong dude. Yeah. So he can kind of give it to you either way.
But that kind of, is our fantasy book of this. And, we kind of went through this and my God, what it would be if something like this ever happened.
Yeah. And just as it starts to unfold, as you hear it unfold, it's just like, my God, there's so many different, I might have even thrown a little seed out there for when the BCC gives John Moxley that look, maybe somewhere down the road, Mox and Roman get back together and they fight the BCC.
Right. Who knows?
There's infinite possibilities with your fantasy booking, but that's what makes it fun.
Absolutely.
I'm sure people out there listening right now like, oh, well, I would take it this way from there. I would do that. And that's the best part of it. Because it's not going to happen. So let's disclaimer that now. Unless you own both Fight Forever and WWE 2K23, it ain't going to happen. You can make it happen in your own little world, but it damn sure better not happen on TNT, USA, or Fox. So that's first. Second, it's because we're such fans of it. It's because we're so invested in these type of characters and the wrestling business as a whole, that you could create something like this, pretty much on the fly and just say, hey, look at how wonderful the world could be. As great as it is right now, as much as we love it now, you want to get back to those 8-9 point ratings that they used to get where you got 11 million people watching your show on a Monday night? Start doing stuff like this.
Yep.
You want to do that Forbidden Door pay-per-view that I told you I didn't know if I loved anymore? Because start doing stuff like this. Let that kind of Forbidden Door open. And right. Oh my God. I mean, at this point, all other sports would have to back down, not named football. I mean, True. If you're not the NFL, at this point, basketball, the UFC, everybody else would be like, wait a minute, what's happening right here? Because we're losing our ratings, and somehow or another, this wrestling nonsense is way up there. So
yeah. All right, so that kind of wraps up our fantasy booking episode of the Tribal Screw Job.
Ah, yeah. And that was fun. We got to do more of these.
That was a good one. So, after listening to this, reach out on our social media platforms. Drop us a line. Tell us what you think would happen. What would your spinoff of this be? Maybe Seth's not the right foil. Who would it have been then? So definitely reach out. Drop us a line. We'd love to engage in conversation. And with that, we appreciate everybody for listening today. We hope that you enjoyed this.
Well, before we wrap, one thing. So okay, I just got to make sure Triple H doesn't hear, because, he has a history of heart problems.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't want him to get wind of this, think somehow or another that this is on the paper.
Triple H, this was just fantasy.
Yeah, this was just for fun. Yeah. So, I don't want to, tomorrow we have some big report that Triple H had cardiac arrest.
Don't need that pacemaker kick.
No, you stay healthy out there, sir. We're just pretending. It's just for fun.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. And with that, we bid you adieu.
Peace.
Today's podcast was produced by SBP. You can find our podcast on all major podcast platforms. Also connect with us on our social media accounts. Search for The Bookers Alliance on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.